Goeiedag, good day, fellow South Africans and citizens of the world.
I've been looking around for salvation. I've been looking around for the truth. All around me I see frustration, and I looked all over till I found you. I sit and listen to your stories, and you're telling me, please don't worry. There's a lot in this world you should know, and love in life is where you should go. If you're looking for somewhere to go, if you're looking for someone to know, if you're looking for someone to guide you, then love in life will guide you.
Goeienaand, good evening, fellow South Africans and citizens of the world. Now, before introducing our guest tonight, I want to tell you the story of the person who had the winning bid of 15,000 Rand at the auction of the lion painting a few days ago. Louis Minnie then offered to pay all General Isaac van Zyl's outstanding hospital costs, amounting to 50,000 Rand. Both Marlena and Isaac's wife were in phone contact with Louis until a couple of days ago. After several excuses about why the money had not been paid, he has now blocked both and disappeared without paying. This is a message to bidders on auctions. Please, please, please do not bid if you're not serious about making the payment. The joy, then disappointment, then heartache that Isaac and his family went through as a result of this deception is palpable. We will re-auction the painting with the money from the winning bid going to Isaac, of course. On the other hand, last night one of our viewers, Kyra, offered to pay 10,000 Rand to Steve's Rainbow Foundation. Within hours, the money had been paid. Thank you so much, Kyra. Alright, tonight we meet Rassool Snyman. Rassool Snyman is from the Anti-Treason Movement. Rassool has some very interesting perspectives on the political history of South Africa and the underlying deceptions that are taking place. Let me get Rassool on. Here we go. Hi, Rassool.
Hi, Scott. How's it?
Excellent, mate. Excellent. I've just got your little icon at the moment.
Let me just check this. You preparing?
Just while Rassool is doing that, what we're going to be doing tonight is looking at the politics of South Africa from a very different and interesting perspective. There we go. Hi, Rassool. Now I see you.
Hi, how are you, Scott?
Good, mate, good. Now, let's start off with your movement. You've got a movement called the Anti-Treason Movement. Tell us about that and why you formed it.
Well, the Anti-Treason Movement is a patriotic movement that's non-partisan. It's above politics, it's above race, it's above religion, it's above class, and it includes every citizen that loves his country. The reason for the formation of the Anti-Treason Movement was fundamentally to address the failure of the state, the failure of government, the failure of the ability for us to build this nation. And the failure was not a natural failure. The failure was because of endemic corruption, incompetence. Part of the reason was the power that was given the throne was only concerned with keeping the power of the throne rather than serving the nation. And by so doing, according to international standards and otherwise, have committed treason.
Right. Okay. Now, let's look back a bit in political history. Pre-1994, we had the National Party. And post-1994, we had the African National Congress. Both political parties embrace the word national. Please tell us how their methodology differs, if in fact it does.
Well, fundamentally, one has to go to the beginning. I like starting at the beginning.
Off you go.
Our history began, our combined history began when the ships landed here. The first were the Portuguese, the second were the Dutch. And then our history unfolded from there. The first part of our history was colonialism, for example. The second part of our history was apartheid. And the third part of our history was neo-colonialism with the latter-day apartheid. So that's where we are. We see very little difference between the apartheid regime and the ANC. Because structurally, if one looks at it at a principle level, structurally, what was called the revolution then was not realized. For example, if we look now, the economy is still not in the hands of the people. The wealth has never been redistributed. The land question has never been engaged. The only thing that happened was there was a parliamentary system which came out of a feudalist system governed by lords or catering for lords that is now in place. Now we sit with representative democracy and no direct democracy. With the end result, we hire a person or a party for 5 years, and this party becomes our God, which we cannot move, we cannot remove, we cannot even question, it seems. And under the rubric of COVID-19, it's become a monster.
Right. Now, tell us the difference between representative democracy and direct democracy.
Well, representative democracy allows the party to do as it please, put people in place in areas where they please, not where the people directly elect whom they choose. They're not in contact with their councillors, for example. That's at the very, very lowest level. They don't have the ability to question. They don't have the ability to remove. They don't have the ability to engage directly. Someone else makes a decision for them. And the only decision they make is which wolf to decide on that will eat them. Politics has become a game of people coming out of the woodwork and convincing you that they are the best people to rob you. And you don't have a voice in that transaction. And representative democracy ensures that there's a buffer between you and your elected representative, and also the parties are making decisions that they shouldn't make. For example, why do we have a party deciding who should be the president of this country when in a direct democracy system, we should be able to decide that as the people? If we, the people, have no voice, then is this a democracy? What kind of democracy? When we look at, for example, the forms of democracy, you have, for example, uh, representative democracy, you have direct democracy, and you have an oligarchy. Right now, let me add the fourth one, a corporatocracy. Right now, we sit with an oligarchy. If you look, it's one family that's beginning to intermarry, and it's it's governing us. And beginning not to govern us, but to rule us. And that is very, very problematic as far as democracy is concerned, as far as the republic is concerned, and as far as our rights as human beings and citizens of this country are concerned.
Wow. You know, I've got to say, you've really hitting the nail on the head. What you're saying makes absolute sense. Before I pose the next question to you, I just want to say hi to everybody who's joined us. We've got, well, about 250 people watching right now. Please remember to put your questions to our guest, Rassool, in the side chat, and if the moderators can just copy those and paste them later, so that we can actually put those to Rassool. Now, Rassool, you mentioned feudalism. Now, feudalism stems back from the Middle Ages, where you had a lord and everybody served that lord, and in exchange he got protection through the army that the lord had. That's the sort of basics of feudalism. Who is behind the throne in South Africa today? Who is the lord, the chief?
One has to go back and look at the feudal system, for example, and say, what are the differences between this current system of governance that we have? The current system of governance is unapologetically a case of lords. It's not a case of presidents. It's not a case of public servants. It's a case of lords. For example, the lords could take your tithes or taxes and abuse them, and you never had a voice or a say in that. The government takes our taxes and abuses them, and we don't have a say in it. We can't directly say whether we don't have a direct say in whether we want someone to govern us or whether we can remove them. That's a lord. It's a different title, but the same poison. So we do sit with the trappings of democracy, but it's not a true democracy. And that's where our points of contention arise.
Right. Okay. Now, when we look at the blatant corruption that's going on today within the ANC, and you look at someone like Ace Magashule, who's the Secretary General, who seems to be the head of the mafia in the ANC, he certainly does seem to be above the law. No one seems to be taking him on or taking him to court, and he basically puts a middle finger out if anyone even suggests that he's done something wrong. Is he like one of those lords you're talking about?
Well, yes. If you notice, if you go back to feudalism, for example, if you do a comparison, there's no people that took a king to court. There's no one, except the French, who decided to take the king to the guillotine. And now we see exactly the same similarities. Like I'm saying, it's the same poison with the different label. I have never, ever in a democracy seen anyone take someone as crooked as some of the players that are in the ANC and in the EFF. I don't want to exclude the EFF as well. And in the EFF, and put them in power and still follow them and still vote for them. And simply because it's a matter of bribing the people with free lunch parcels and T-shirts. And this is the disgrace of South Africa.
Right. Now, is there a suggestion, however, that in the African culture, everything seems to be very patriarchal? What you do is you have one chief who rules over a certain tribe, and he's the boss, he's the king, he's in charge. What you got within the ANC is a number of chiefs like Ramaphosa, Dlamini Zuma, Ace Magashula, and so on, and they all seem to be competing for that top job position. Do you think part of this is a cultural thing within the ANC?
We've been grappling with this. I've actually written a paper on this and asking what makes African people so submissive, what makes them so complacent, and what makes them accept power. Aside from the psychological framework of they look like us. Now, there are many dynamics that contribute to the method and manner politics. This happened in apartheid, and now it's happening in the new apartheid. So we're trapped in color politics. We also in personality politics, because people go for personalities as opposed to going for merit, for example.
Right.
And that gives us a secondary problem. Then we look at the concept of blind subscription to power, because power is unchanging. Again, that takes us to feudalism, because if you look at the concept of chiefs and kings, for example, which exist in African culture, they too contribute to why the people are submissive and all-encompassing and docile. However, one must also point out there's a thing in African culture called regicide. Regicide in different countries is where they have a king, but if the weather doesn't perform, let's say you have a drought, for example, or the king doesn't perform, you kill him. It's called regicide. And that's part of African culture. It's not practiced here in the South, but I'm beginning to think maybe we should import that culture.
Yeah, bring back the death penalty. Now, okay, so what we're actually saying, if we look at the political history of society, what we're actually saying is the current form of democracy is really feudalism in disguise, which is what's happening in South Africa.
Well, what happens, you must remember, everything evolves. The British gave us the parliamentary system, and the British worked with the Lord system. They were the lords, and therefore they prescribed to the common folk, the commoners, and that was a class system. Yes, it was a class system which we imported, or which was imported to us here. Now, when the ANC came into power, it spoke about the second revolution. The second revolution was supposedly to look at the Westminster system and say, does that work for the people? Are the politicians accountable to the people? Do the people directly elect their politicians? Can they remove their politicians, for example? Because if you look at direct democracy, that would have been ideal, especially after what was the negotiations, which were very secret, which were done with the white elite that was negotiating with the black elite. But it never was a person-to-person, people-to-people transaction where we all sat down as people and said, what is our collective future? How do we design our future? What are the stumbling blocks? How do we make up for the past? How do we heal each other? And how do we address the status quo? What happened was, this was decided between two sets of elitists, and both of them were wrong. Both of them were guilty of criminality, both. Now, we've now seen, when we inherited that system, we never changed it. And after 1994, everyone was euphoric. Everyone thought there was a new beginning. We had the TRC show, it was like the Rocky Horror TRC show, and we bought it, but that was a band-aid over the real social problems that existed, because if, for example, we never had an amicable solution as far as the economy was concerned, and we never addressed the land question in a non-combative manner, then of course violence was the end result. It was going to be the end result. And now we believe that the chickens have come home to roost. That's why we're sitting with criminality at a level that's unprecedented. We're sitting with violent crime at a level that's unprecedented. And we're seeing attacks on ordinary people that's unprecedented.
Right.
In the meanwhile, the elites are never touched. No one touches the elites.
Yeah.
They lords. Remember, they lords.
Right. Okay. So we're talking about the black privilege, the guys at the top of the ANC.
Yes. If you look at, for example, there was a redistribution of wealth, but to an elite. It was an elite to an elite. I mean, for example, if you look at elitism, even during apartheid, and one needs to be very honest and open and brutal about apartheid. Apartheid was about elites. Apartheid was the Barney Bernatos. It was the Cecil Rhodes. It was about the Oppenheimers and the De Beers.
And the Rothschilds.
But it wasn't really, it wasn't really about the poor average Joe. During apartheid, I traveled to a place, I think it was Colenso, and I saw a little white girl. This girl had no shoes. She lived in a house with no windows. You know, and having come from KZN, I said, I didn't know this was happening. Yeah. And if you look at the history of mining, for example, the elites exploited white miners in exactly the same way they exploited black miners. Yeah. So within apartheid itself, there was criminality. And so although race was the paradigm within which this criminality existed, one cannot ignore the criminality that existed at that particular point. And I think the same kind of criminality manifests itself in the way that Ramaphosa drove the Marikana shootings and killings and exploitation. Yeah. So there are similarities, and as history unfolds, we're beginning to see the similarities. I mean, for example, if one goes to Wales, you'll see that the English oppress the Welsh people. The miners suffer from lung diseases, no different to a miner here in the Orange Free State. So the wealthy class always oppress within the race paradigm and without the race paradigm.
Right. Now, I've noticed that every time Ramaphosa is in trouble, whether it be Eskom or whether it be PPE looting by the ANC, it doesn't matter what it is, but if he's in trouble, he goes back to the same old trump card, which is blame it on apartheid. Have you noticed that?
Well, two things that happen. You must remember that every magician plays with misdirection. They show you the one hand when they do something else. This is the game of politics. In fact, some people refer to politics as politricks. Because it's a game, and you'll see all politicians play this game. They play the game that, for example, if something goes wrong, you blame the Chinese. In America, the people blame the Chinese, then they blame everyone else. In South Africa, we blame apartheid. But that does not mean that the remnants of apartheid are not still here. We still suffer that. That's why, as a society, as a people, we're still divorced, we're still opposing each other, we're still fighting with each other, we still have violent tendencies between each other. It's because we haven't addressed apartheid in the manner in which it was supposed to have been addressed. Again, I'm going back to what was the TRC. We never had a people-to-people discussion. It's very seldom that people can openly and honestly talk about the race question. Even today, we have difficulty talking about the race question. It makes everybody uncomfortable. But until we begin to speak about racism openly, and we get to a point of neutrality where we can sit and say, okay, that was messed up. It was a crime against humanity. What do we do from this point on? If we don't do that, we're going to prolong the problem rather than resolve it. And we can't keep shifting the problem. I think there has to be a cutoff date or time where we say within the trajectory of the building of our country that we begin to ensure that everybody participates and we build the country that we had in mind in 1994.
Right, the Rainbow Nation. Now, that brings me to the next point, and that point is, look at what the ANC have done when it comes to employment. They've brought in this black economic empowerment strategy, which has basically disenfranchised the entire white population and other minority groups as well, to the benefit of not the general black population, but of the black elite, the ANC cadres, the guys at the top of the pecking order, because they're the ones who are putting through or building these little shelf companies and getting these deals with state enterprises and putting a huge markup, and then they've got these Maseratis and they've done absolutely nothing. That's what's happening to the money today. And the other peoples, I'm talking about the brown people, the white people, the Indian people, they're all being disenfranchised. So when we talk about race, you've basically now got reverse racism happening, where these other groups are now being ostracized by the ruling ANC government. What are your views on that? I mean, how can you get rid of racism when that's in play?
Well, I've got to say there's an intersection between race and class. If we look at, for example, race at the highest level, the same class is exploiting and stealing, and it's across race. The ANC is doing it in a very fumbling manner, but we also have like the Steenhofs, for example, which indicate that there are people that are benefiting, and this across the divide. We also look at, for example, if you look at the Eskom tenders, for example, they're across the racial line, but they still within the class line. The ordinary man, let's say the ordinary Afrikaner, the ordinary English-speaking person, he's not a beneficiary of that exploitation, that plunder. In the same manner, the ordinary black person is not a beneficiary of that plunder. There's still a crime within a crime. The major crime is the plundering and pilfering of the country, but within that crime, there's an elite that's plundering from everyone else as well, which can take you to the taxation question. The taxation is being plundered, and it's not the ordinary man that's stealing the taxes. It's the highest level thieves that are out there stealing as much as they can possibly steal, and what they're doing with this is gutting the country. Now, theft is not just theft. At this magnitude, it's not theft, it's treason, because it's bringing the country to a point where the country cannot function. It's bringing the country to a point where democracy cannot function. It's bringing the country to a point where the hospitals, the schools cannot function. It's bringing the country to a point where poverty is becoming widespread. And if you get poverty, you get violence. If you get violence, of course, it translates into criminality. And now this is no more a matter of theft. It's no more a matter of simple criminality. It's a matter of treason, because the country in itself is being brought to its knees. And that treason is translating into murder. It's translating into mayhem. It's translating into the loss of lives and businesses. And we think it should stop.
Well, what we're seeing in South Africa today is exactly what you just talked about. You know, you've got a total state of decay. The country is crumbling. So, with your organization, the Anti-Treason Movement, how are you going to actually implement that? How are you actually going to use that to take on this corrupt ANC government?
Well, what we've done, we firstly analyzing. If you look at legalities, everything is based on an analysis. We are then forming relationships with other people. We're forming relationships with OTA, for example. We're forming relationships with Right to Know. We're forming relationships with Corruption Watch. And we're looking internationally as well, whether we can get objective people to actually analyze and investigate, because of the fact that even the system, the entire system is rigged. For example, we managed to work with Corruption Watch and OTA to get the Seriti Commission outcomes set aside. Now, this tells you that we have exactly what ACE is doing now, is saying that we will get the criminal to investigate the criminal and decide on the criminal. And so it's structural. And we have to look at, for example, firstly, we look at legislation. Legislation is too soft. We cannot just have maladministration in cases of blatant corruption. We cannot have corruption in places where the magnitude of the corruption cripples the country. That is high treason. If you go and look at international law pertaining to high treason, if you do anything that serves other interests other than the interests of the country or the well-being of the country, especially when you have a fiduciary responsibility to ensure that the well-being of the country is maintained, safety and security is maintained, then you commit treason. And we have to work with broader society, because we are only as strong as society is. If society falls asleep, then as Plato says, if you're not involved in politics, then you'll be governed by evil men. And we're not involved in politics, thus we're being governed by evil men. Can we change it? Yes, I believe so. I believe that if the communities awaken, if the communities can understand the game that's being played, they can awaken, they can join hands, they can meet across the lines of race, class, and we can fix this country and structurally ensure that democracy works for all of us.
Right. Well, I think the broader community are waking up. You look at the number of protests that are happening across the divide now. It's not just the Africans protesting about lack of service delivery. It's now the white community protesting against the corruption of the ANC, the farm attacks, the farm murders. They're all full with this ANC government. There's no question about that. Now, a bit earlier you said we actually now have an oligarchy in South Africa. You're talking about this one dominant family. Is that the Zuma family?
Well, if you look at it, there are two dominant families within the ANC. Let's keep this to the ANC.
Right.
At this point, if you look at, for example, the Motsepes, you look at the Ramaphosas, for example, that's one faction. And it's a family faction. If you look at, for example, the Zumas, that's another family faction. Now, if you remember correctly, there's also tribalism that threads through this, because
yes.
Zuma, if you remember, Malema was born out of the love of Zuma, so to speak, and he brought Zuma in on the Zulu Boy campaign, if you recall.
Yeah.
When they did the Zulu Boy campaign, that was focusing largely on the Zulu faction of the two warring families in the ANC. And you'll see this battle being played out all the time. You see it in their NCCs. You see it in their dialogue sometimes. You'll hear them addressing each other in a way that's not particularly friendly. Sometimes it's even unprofessional. But this tells you that our politics are divided along the lines of families rather than being a true democracy. Right. And for us, that's a frightening factor.
Right. Now, just talking about that, do you think that Ramaphosa and his faction, that he is a lame duck president? Just a week ago he said, we're going to take on this corruption head on. We're not going to let it happen within the ANC. And then the very next day, or a couple of days later, it was announced that the people who would be investigating the PPE corruption would be a committee of high-ranking ANC politicians, which is like the wolves investigating the wolves. What are your thoughts on Ramaphosa? Do you think he's a lame duck president? Do you think he's now controlled by the Zuma faction?
There are multiplicity of factors one has to take into account, and especially the war within the ANC. The ANC, by taking the road to perdition, which was corruption, it changed the character of the ANC. The ANC became the gravitational point to which every thief and looter gravitated in the country. If you wanted to loot, you'd go to the ANC. If you wanted a life of crime, you go to the ANC. You know, that's where you could legally commit any crime that you wanted and get away with it. Now, that had a downside. The downside was that every good person within the ANC was either marginalized, or they were isolated, or they were rendered powerless, put into some obscure office where they had no power. Now, this is the danger that faces Cyril Ramaphosa at present. I'm not a fan of Cyril Ramaphosa and not a fan of the ANC, but it doesn't mean that I will not give an objective view of the ANC and Ramaphosa. Ramaphosa is a man surrounded by wolves. The same wolves he was an architect in creating, because when they created the ANC in 1994, they created the pack of wolves, or they raised the cubs, which went immediately into the what was that saga with tails? I'm forgetting. The Seriti Commission was about the arms deal.
Right.
Now, when they went into the arms deal gave every looter in the country a blank check to loot, and gave out an invitation to say, come to the ANC, we can do what we want as long as you vote for us and come with people that can keep us in power. Now, Cyril Ramaphosa cannot do much. He may want to, because he'd like to get rid of Ace Magashula, but he cannot, because Ace Magashula now has outnumbered him, because the corruptees and the corruptors in the ANC outnumber the people who would want to make a change. So he's a victim of his own mechanics, or his own shenanigans, or his own architecture. And therefore, as much as he'd like to, he can't. He made a bold statement. He made a bold statement in that the ANC is corrupt. He made a bold statement in that others should investigate the ANC other than the ANC. But if you read carefully, it was Magashula, it was Ace himself who said no, and he put a spanner in the works, and they outvoted Cyril Ramaphosa. So he sits now with the chickens that have come home to roost, and I'm not sure what's he going to do about it. Some people say remove Ramaphosa, but I'm asking, who do we get next? Do we have a choice between Ramaphosa and Magashula? Who would we take at this particular point? And this from a strategic point of view, because we have two devils that we're grappling with. So what do we do? That's the question that society needs to answer in itself.
Right. Now, I find it very interesting after the last election, when Ramaphosa was sort of, maintained his position as president in South Africa. It was Ace Magashula who, way back then, said all the decisions that are made by the ANC are not made by the president, they're made by the collective, this small group of people behind the scenes. Now, is the collective represented by the NCC that kind of rules South Africa at the moment? Is that the collective that Ace Magashula is talking about? People like Becky Cele, Dlamini Zuma, obviously Ace Magashula and Ramaphosa, and then you got the finance minister. I think he's in there as well. Is that who is actually running South Africa? So if it is, Ramaphosa is just a lame duck president. He's not really running the country.
Well, if we go back again, if you go into something called neo-colonialism, for example, you've got to look at why do they have to go to Rupert to make decisions? Why do they have to always involve the Oppenheimers? Why do they have to go to Britain? And if you remember, every president goes to Britain. You know, that's one aspect that we must also keep in mind
Right.
as a backdrop. The other thing is, when you look at the major domos, so to speak, of the country, then you're looking at the big six, what they call the big six. And these are the guys, the heavyweights in the ANC. because these are the guys with the what do you call this, the struggle history and the credibility and the currency that comes from the liberation struggle.
Right.
Therefore, they carry a lot of weight, and this happens behind the scene. But you must also bear in mind that they're dying. They're dying, they're retiring, and so on and so forth. And what is happening? You got the new wolves in power. Now, the new wolves are only interested in one thing. What is it? What is in it for me? How can I take the money? How much money can I get? And therefore, you'll find the sharks have set upon that 500 billion rands with savagery. And there's no one to pull them, rein them in. There's no one to control them. And so it takes us to the point of what do we do next? Because 500 billion rands is going to put a debt on all our children, not
Right.
only now, but for a couple, maybe a century or two. So where to from here?
Right. Now, you mentioned the Ruperts and the Oppenheimers there. Now, Malema keeps on talking about white monopoly capitalism. Is he talking about those two families in particular, or is he trying to embrace the whole of the white community in South Africa to that white monopoly capital? What are your views on that?
Well, the first thing we've got to understand is that Malema plays the crowd. Malema is not even a true politician. He plays the crowd. All he does is keep himself in power, whip up everyone's emotions, and works through demagoguery. And he's very hypocritical. He's empty. If you look at, for example, his politics, he doesn't have real politics that you can say, okay, this is my agricultural plan. This is my land policy. This is what we're going to do for social cohesion. This is what we're going to do about the economy. You'll never hear that from Julius Malema. What he does instead, he whips up the crowd. He's like anyone that drives a mob. In any mob, you'll find someone in front that's whipping up the emotions, and the crowd mindlessly follows. And the crowd, without weighing up the consequences, does what the leader says. And that's demagoguery. So one cannot take Julius Malema seriously except for the fact that he can get people hanged.
Right. Now, when we talk about the ANC, you know, they seem to be moving towards this journey of bringing in what's called the new democratic revolution, which I think is one of the founding principles of the South African Communist Party, which I think is the faction that supports Ramaphosa in the ANC. How do you think the NDR is being played? Do you think that's really what's going on behind the scene within the ANC?
The ANC will never go for true democracy. It's wordplay. It's a lot of wordplay. And we shouldn't be deceived by the wordplay. We should look at the actions. They say don't listen only to what someone says, but watch what they do. For example, we're sitting with the dictatorship under COVID-19. We've actually watched a soft coup take place. When they formed the NCC, that was a coup because it worked outside the parliamentary process. Do you think these people are going to relinquish power? They may take us down to level 1 and 2 and so on and so forth, but there are some bits of legislation that are going to be retained in order to keep us in track, keep us in check. This is why we say, for example, if they say democracy, will they give us direct democracy? Can we remove the president? Can we dissolve parliament? Can we dissolve the ANC? Can we bar the ANC because of its history of corruption? If they do that, then they're talking about a democratic revolution. Other than that, all they're doing is putting lipstick on a pig. And a pig with lipstick is still a pig.
Yeah. Well, I think a pig is a very appropriate word for some of the people who are in the ANC. Now, you mentioned the NCC and their ability to keep people basically under control through the lockdown. And we're talking about the power block within the ANC. And it's clear that the NCC power block is in the Zuma camp. And for the Zuma camp to retain that power over every South African, the longer they can keep the lockdown, the better for their cause. So what you're suggesting is that this lockdown in South Africa, in some form or the other, could extend for years.
Well, if one looks at, for example, disaster management, there's nothing in place that says disaster management has to end, or like a state of emergency, you have to keep renewing it. But disaster management can continue. And the farce, I'm going to use this term, the farce called COVID-19.
Right.
So far, we are having deaths without any argument we're having deaths, but one still has to look at the cause of the deaths scientifically. One has to look at the numbers scientifically. One has to look at them objectively. And but the scare is still there because it's an unseen enemy. It's an enemy that can be fabricated. It's an enemy that can be kept alive with conjecture, with fear, with whispers. And so this could go on for years. If this goes on for years, what are we going to do?
It's going to kill the economy.
Economy is almost failing already. I mean,
Yeah.
Cell C is closing 130 stores. Besides the Edcon saga, besides the other smaller businesses, because everywhere you go, you'll see shops closed. You know, and that means unemployment's going up. If unemployment's going up and there's no income, hunger's going up. If hunger goes up, then we've got a bigger problem. You know, so again, we're saying that not only did the NCC, under the watch of the ANC, not only did it take powers that it shouldn't have, it misused and abused the powers that it had to destroy the economy and destroy the country, because a country without an economy is shambles, it's chaos. Nothing can function. And if we go to, for example, violence, I mean, violence goes up in the townships, violence goes up in the squatter camps, violence goes up on the farms. You know, so what does one do? When we look at farmers, for example, across the board, food is now becoming a priority. Food is becoming a necessity. Food is becoming inaccessible because the prices are going up in the retail sector. At the same time, production's going down. And at the same time, hunger is rising at an unprecedented level. What do the communities do? We've trapped, the ANC has destroyed this country in that it's trapped the people in a vice of poverty and authoritarianism. So what do the people do? They look at the farmer. They have to look at the farmer because the farmer represents food. Every farmer represents a mealie or a goat or a cow. And this is not only white farmers. If you go into the black communities, for example, and you talk to farmers, they'll tell you that the theft of goats and cows and sheep are becoming an industry. People do it in an organized fashion. A truck comes along, people load up the stock and they go with it. And so the poor are getting poorer. You know, and the corporations are still where they are. For example, if you go to someone like the Crooks brothers, they're still making money. They've got land all over. But who gets caught up as a small farmer who is in fact in debt to the bank? He's not rich. He's not making money. And I always remember the Van der Merwe joke when someone said to Van der Merwe, he said, Van der Merwe, you've won the lotto. What are you going to do now? And he said, I'm going to farm until I go broke. So the farmers, I mean, I do a trees for life project, and I work
Right.
within communities. Farming, believe me, it's not a glamorous life. It's a hard work. It's a lot
It
of
is.
hard work. I bought someone, a community member, I bought them 2 boer goats, and the goats died, you know, and if that was my last money, I don't know what I would have done. You know, so I understand that the farmers themselves, being the food makers of society, need to also be part of the dialogue. So there needs to be a dialogue that needs to happen on a people-to-people basis. We've got to get rid of poverty, because underpinning everything, underpinning the anger, underpinning the even xenophobia, for example, underpinning the violence is poverty,
Right.
is exploitation. And if you look at, for example, the concept of townships, on this I'm going to say we have to go back to apartheid, because apartheid created townships. Townships are unhealthy places to raise a child. Townships are not a place where healthy people come out into society and function in a healthy manner. What we have are dysfunctional people being raised in a dysfunctional environment who come into a functional society with a dysfunctional attitude. And this is causing a lot of mayhem. We haven't yet weighed it. I'm not sure the social scientists have actually looked at this, but I think we should be looking at this and saying, how do we do spatial development? How do we now begin to address the unhealthy environments that produce unhealthy human beings? Because if we don't do that, if there isn't a lateral move, we are going to be stuck with a very violent, dysfunctional, poor society.
Well, there's one thing for sure, and that is that the ANC hierarchy have completely lost touch with the general wider population of the people who vote for them. And they don't seem to care at all for those people. Now, just talking about the lockdown as we were, let's think about post-lockdown. I'd like your views on this. Ramaphosa said about 6 weeks ago that the economy in South Africa is going fantastically well, and once we come out the other side, it's going to facilitate economic or black economic transformation. And I read from what he was saying is that the lockdown is effectively being used to bankrupt all these small white businesses that still exist in South Africa, and where there's a hole left on the other side as you come out the lockdown, what they'll do is they'll get their cadres, the ANC cadres, to come in and try and replicate that business. But there's a problem with that because they don't have the skills, they don't have the knowledge, and that's going to further completely destroy the economy. What are your views, A, on Ramaphosa's statement about how it's going to facilitate black economic transformation? And secondly, what are your views about how that will just completely destroy what's left of the South African economy?
Well, I would say I'd have to look at the performance before the lockdown. The performance was poor before the lockdown. I don't see why a lockdown is going to change anything. In fact, it will exacerbate the problems. What we've had in all this is simply cadre enrichment. We've never, ever had a true empowerment of the people. When you look back, you look at the Asgisas and so on and so forth, the training programs, the money was looted. You know, when you look, for example, at the empowerment programs, the money was looted. I recall there was someone that took a loan out, I think, from the IDC. Was it IDC or NEF? That was 32 million to open a boutique. A boutique. I'm a business consultant. I design businesses. And I've never in my life in South Africa seen someone take 32 million to open a boutique.
That's crazy.
Now, at the same time, if any other poorer South African came with a good business plan and said, look, I want to open a business, can you all fund me? They'll say, if you're a first-time business person, we don't want to fund you. They won't even look at the business plan, evaluate the business plan, go through the business plan with the person. If you go to the NEF, I've sent multiple people to the NEF. I've looked at their business plan. I've looked at their risk management structures. We've helped them adjust it. We did their cash flow. We looked at the idea. We looked at the market. We said everything will work. You should get your money. They went there and they never got their money. Now, cadres within the ANC were also doing a bit of a dastardly thing. Let's say you come with an idea, a very good idea. This is a good business plan. You'll give it to them. They say there's no money. They give it to a cadre, and the cadre will use your business plan to fund themselves and fail. Now, there are multiplicity of things that kept our economy down. It wasn't simply a case of the people not wanting to do business, because if you look out there and you look at, for example, all the informal traders. The informal traders are actually people with spirit, with determination. They're making the wrong decisions. They're doing things the wrong way, but they've got the guts and the determination to sit in the sun and try and sell apples for 7 days a week. Which means there is a commitment to want to change, but no one is giving them the kind of support that they need, the kind of guidance that they need, because everybody's stealing the money. So how can you build a country in the middle of a looting spree? It just doesn't make sense. And what happens is the ANC, by going into cadre deployment, for example, also contributes to the problem because it's trying to keep its own power. So what it does, it puts the wrong people in the wrong place. If I want to build a space station, for example, I won't go and consult a bricklayer. I won't bring on board someone that herds goats. You know, what advice is he going to give me? He doesn't have the technical skills. He doesn't have the concept in his mind. He doesn't even recognize the plans. If I gave him the plans, he wouldn't be able to read it. So this is what the ANC did. It put the wrong people in the wrong seats. And in any business that you go into, you put the wrong people in the wrong seats, the business fails. And
Exactly.
we put the wrong government in the wrong seat. Therefore, the country fails.
And that's exactly what's happening. Now, look, there's one particular example of what you're talking about, putting the wrong people in the wrong seat, and that's the ex-mayor of Durban, Zandile Gumede, who's facing corruption charges, serious corruption charges, and they now make her MPL in KwaZulu-Natal. And apparently the reason she got that position was because she is in the Zuma Magashula camp. And the point was raised that that camp is too strong. Nobody can actually take her out now that she's been given that position. What are your views about people like that being put in these positions of power? And there seems to be a sense of righteousness. So, well, I'm going to do the right thing for the people, is what she said when the media asked her the question. When you look at her track record, it's abysmal. Is this an example of what you're talking about?
One has to look at the kind of psychosis that's in political circles. For example, there's a schizophrenia that's in political circles where people say, you know, we're going to save the country while we drown the country. You know, that's the schizophrenic sort of narrative that there is.
Right.
It's double talk. In political circles, you call that double speak. You say two things at the same time and do two things at the same time, one to destroy and one to build. And you do less on the building and you do more on the destroying. On her, I don't have a very good opinion of her. I don't have, not personally, but as a counselor, I don't have a good opinion of her as a public servant. I don't have my faith in her. I wouldn't trust her with my chickens, so to speak.
Yeah.
And further, I think the looting was so widespread that if she falls, she's going to drag down a number of other people with her. And they can't afford to let her fall. And also, you must remember, there has to be that air of invincibility around the ANC. Because if it loses its grip just once, the people will pounce on it. And one has to look at not only Zandile, one has to look at Ace Magashula himself.
Exactly.
And say, when does he go to court? You know, when? Are they above the law? Why do these camps exist in a democracy? Why do they exist? Because we are the people. We should remove them. And in my opinion, we should be mobilizing. We should be getting everyone together. Get 2 million signatures, get 3 million signatures, get 4 million signatures, and say, let's dissolve parliament. Let's put in a caretaker government. Let's change legislation. Let's ensure that there's civilian oversight. That's in our document as the Anti-Treason Movement. That's what we want. And we need everyone to stand behind us and help us make change, because we are only as strong as the citizen is. There's an expression, they say, as the people are, so will their leaders be. If we are weak, our leaders will be weak. If we are a strong democratic nation, believe me, we'll have strong leaders with integrity because they'll fear us. We should never fear our government. Our government should fear us because we employ them.
Right.
They don't employ us.
Right, now, I just want to quickly address the people watching this video at the moment. Thank you so much for joining this discussion. I'm finding it incredibly informative. For those of you who are visiting Loving Life channel for the first time, please do subscribe to this channel. We have very, very interesting discussions most nights with a range of people. In fact, if you go to the home page of Loving Life, you'll see all the live streams prominently below, and just go and have a look at a couple of those. We have some amazing live streams like the one we're having tonight, and we've got about 500 people watching right now, Rassool. I want to change direction a little bit. I want to look at the media, the role of the media in all this, because it appears to me that the so-called legacy media or mainstream media in South Africa are not performing. They're not doing their job in basically exposing the ANC. They seem to be complicit in the corruption by the way they report. And a top dog of all this is, of course, South African TV, which is now financed by the ANC. So you can understand why that's happening. But just to make things more complicated, we do have the alternative media with YouTube channels like this one. Now, in South Africa, the ANC are just bringing in a new censorship bill, which is going to basically stop YouTube channels from being able to actually, or people to put up videos in YouTube channels, because they have to go through this process of accreditation and getting their videos rated like PG or A or whatever it might be. It's totally ludicrous because YouTube as a platform does that anyway. It basically, believe me, they talk about tyrannical. YouTube as a platform is tyrannical. But that's another story. So let's just get back to the media, the mainstream media in South Africa. What do you think they're doing their job?
One has to understand the nature of media. The rise of corporate media has meant that the ordinary person does not have a voice. The only thing the media is interested in is selling papers. And it doesn't give two hoots about society. It doesn't give two hoots about the development in society. All it needs to do is sell papers and ensure that its investors get dividends and its directors take home nice packages. So media, we should never expect, in the latter day media, we should never expect miracles from media, because media also fits into the corporate profile. And if we look at the corporate profile is only about money. It's not about people. It's not about democracy. One can see this in CNN and Fox, for example, and what they do. They'll sell you a lie if they need to, as long as it sells papers, as long as it gets viewers. The whole idea of telling the truth is now becoming a revolutionary act. And as the laws are being promulgated, one can see the media is being shut down, the media is being controlled, the media is being manipulated. For one, just this morning, I tried to promote this show, and I put it on 3 of my groups, and Facebook shut me down. They said it went against community standards.
What?
So the algorithms, I'm telling you.
Facebook shut down your page, or they shut down that particular post?
That particular post, they said after 3, I think I posted on 3 sites and groups that I manage as well, and I'm members of. And they said it goes against community standards, it's spam. Yet on other posts, I had put out posts up to about 70, 80 times, because I manage a lot of groups, and I have a footprint of about 700,000 people. So I was shocked. I was actually shocked. I thought, what happened now? I hadn't even, I think on the 4th post, they shut me down. They said it goes against community standards. And I looked through the post, I objected, but it was too late. I mean, the show came on and I didn't have time to market it.
Wow. You know, I've had the same problem with YouTube. I've had videos taken down because I've basically shown the views of qualified doctors when it comes to COVID-19. And because that goes against YouTube's views, they say, no, that's against our community standards, we're taking this video down. It's quite extraordinary. Now, just quickly to the people watching again, guys, if you've got questions you'd like to put to our guest, Rassool, please feel free to do so in the side chat, and I'll ask the moderators to copy them, and we'll put them to Rassool a bit later. Now, Rassool, we've been talking about the current politics in South Africa. Now, I think your background is Khoi, isn't it, or Khoisan?
I'm a Bushman.
You're a Bushman.
Khoisan is the yes.
Yeah, so you're a San.
Yeah, actually, it's Kam.
Okay, tell us the difference. But the San is actually a colonial word brought in because they couldn't say the way you just said it.
Yes, what happened was, if you look at, for example, the whole idea of indigenous people is that we're trying to recover our identity.
Absolutely.
In a sense that when you go back to colonial times, most indigenous people suffer exactly what we suffer, whether you go to Australia or you go to New Zealand, or whether you go to the Americas or Latin America. It's always the same thing. Your identity is taken from you, your culture is taken from you, your language is taken from you, and your land is taken from you, and your access to the wealth is taken from you. With the end result, we've now begun to recover our identity. South Africa, there was a bit of a difference in terms of what was done. They took us as indigenous people and threw us under the bus called colored.
Yeah.
And there's no such thing as a colored. If you go into our history, there's no such thing as a colored. We've always been brown people. And if you go back into science, we are the first people. Science has proven that we are the first people from Mossel Bay. If you go back to Mossel Bay, and there's an interesting point. If you go to the Mossel Bay Man, if you go look on that site, and it gives you quite an in-depth explanation, and it verifies as to why they hold that view, not only from the stone implements that they had, but also from things like body lice, teeth, and so on and so forth, and also the paintings. The paintings speak 350,000 years. And that's an amazing journey. It's an amazing point to go back in time and history. And I think as South Africans, many of us don't know the history of South Africa. We've had the imposed history, and the imposed history was at the expense of the real history. And I think for all of us, we should take the journey of discovery and discover Africa, discover South Africa, and that may be the way in which we'll build a new society with new values.
Right. Now, when we talk about the San and the Khoi and history, early history in South Africa, they were the first people in Southern Africa, the whole of Southern Africa, right up into Zimbabwe, Angola, Mozambique. That was basically their country, their land, and they just roamed the land. They were very nomadic. But what happened was you had an invasion from the south, which was the Jan van Riebeck and the Dutch coming in through the Cape, and you had an invasion coming in from the north, which was the Bantu and Nguni people coming down from East Africa and other parts of Africa. And now you have this incredible situation where the ANC are suggesting that they were the first landowners in South Africa, and the land across South Africa was stolen from them. And we're talking basically the Bantu and Nguni people are suggesting that they have been kicked off the lands in places like the Free State and the Cape and stuff like that, when they had no presence there when the white settlers came through. And if you look at the treatment of the San and the Khoi by the Zulu, it was absolutely mercenary. They just killed anyone who they came across. They exterminated the people in that area. Whereas if you look at the white settlers, although they did a lot of bad things, given, totally agree with that, but they did allow the communities to continue to do or live as they used to live, and of course that changed as time went by. But the point I'm getting to here is that this expropriation of land without compensation that's been put forward by the ANC, don't you see that as one of the most devious things that has been brought out, and one of the most economy killing things that's been brought out by the ANC government?
Well, one has to look at, one has to go back to the beginning. As I said,
Yeah.
I like going back to the beginning. The hunter-gatherers, we've got to understand that all of humanity, whether you're black, white, yellow, or green, you emerge from the Khoisan people.
Exactly.
We've got to understand that.
Yeah, we all came from the same place.
If we agree on that principle, then it changes the narrative a bit. The first thing is when the Khoi emerged at the demise of the Neanderthals, and the Khoi emerged, the Homo sapiens emerged. That was after the last ice age. The ice started melting, and the communities started following all the various animals. And if you follow the animal trail, it goes up to the savannas, and that used to happen historically. The Bushman people, my ancestors, used to follow the animal trails, and they used to settle along as they went. Along, and they went to the Great Lakes region. Some people settled there. Some people settled in Ethiopia. Some people settled in Ghana. Some people went up further to the Sahara. Some people went further out of Africa into the Middle East. Because remember, that was all connected. There was no Suez Canal. And they went further into Europe and China and so on and so forth. And they settled. And the DNA trail shows you that. Now, from the African perspective, great civilizations emerged. Civilizations like Egypt, for example, the pyramids, the Nubians, the Kush, kingdoms that were great. Then the second migration happened. There was an inward migration in Africa, where, for example, the Arabs came in, where the Arabs, the Africans themselves, let's say from Egypt, began to migrate downwards. With them, they also brought the Islamicization of the north. They also came as far as the Great Lakes region, aside from the trading. Then there was another migration. The migration happened with the people from the Great Lakes region. Now, if you look at our DNA trail, for example, the Ethiopians and the Pygmies, if you look at them, they're our closest relatives from the DNA perspective. And the Nguni and the Abantu, because people say Bantu, but there's no such thing as Bantu. It's Abantu, the Ntu.
Right.
And of course the Nguni, and they migrated as well, but the migration was very small and very slow, and this was about, say, 4,000 to 2,000 years ago. And when they migrated, they came into our areas. When they came, from a population point of view, there was a balance. Then, with the advent of the colonial forces, when the colonizers came here, they also brought smallpox. When they brought smallpox, they decimated our people, and our people were a people. Some people think we were a tribe. We weren't a tribe, we were a people. And you'll see, even if you go to Sudan, for example, there are Khoisan people, I'll use the term loosely, there are Khoisan people who still have their identity as Khoisan. And you'll find this in Zimbabwe, you'll find this in Angola, you'll find it in all these other little countries. But they are minorities now because of the three smallpox epidemics. Now, what happened was, anyone that's in immunology or is a geneticist will tell you that when genes have not been exposed, or a body has not been exposed to any virus or anything that it has not encountered before, it becomes very susceptible to it. It's got no defense.
Right.
And our people died in huge numbers.
About 80%, I think, died.
Huge numbers. Yes. And with the end result, the demographics changed. So from a people who were equal to the Nguni and the Abantu, maybe even more than them, we were decimated and we became a minority. So our problems multiplied with that. Now, we must remember that when the Ntu and the Nguni people came, they were small groupings. They were family groupings that grew a little bit and at a time, and there weren't real hostilities until the emergence of the Zulu. You must remember, the Zulu is a recent construct. The Zulu was was born out of a tribal imperialism, for example. And when the Zulu was born, the Zulu murdered other people, because there was another murderous campaign that was conducted against other folk. And I just met another brother whom we were discussing history with, and he said he feels like demanding reparations from the Zulu, for example, because they decimated these people. Now, when that happened, the politics changed. The politics of the country changed. And at the same time, the British and the Afrikaners were also doing what the ANC is doing. They were stirring up trouble. With the end result, there was too much resentment. Whereas this was a rich country, if the elites of both the colonial forces and the apartheid forces weren't as greedy and as corrupt as they were, we might have still had a good country in spite of everything that had occurred. But the elites didn't want to. And if you look at colonialism, for example, one has to go to colonialism, because colonialism, when the Hollanders or the Dutch arrived here, they were refugees fleeing their own problems and poverty.
Yeah.
But, and in their lands, they were being oppressed by the elites. The elites that followed them here, and the elites that were funding the trips. And colonialism, settler colonialism, by its very nature, what it does, the elites come in, they take charge of the resources, the diamonds, the gold, and so on and so forth, and they give land to the settler. The settler becomes a buffer between the natives, the angry natives, and the elites. And that trend continues, because right now the farmer is a buffer between the angry natives and the elites. So for all of us, we have to go back and say, let's look at these elites who are using all of us to fight each other. And let's begin to address that, whether the elite is black, white, yellow, or green. We address the ANC elite. We address the elite behind the elite. And then we look for peace in this country, because our country needs peace. That's where we are.
Right,
I hope I've answered your question.
Yeah, now Manuel Magro says, Rassool, you cannot compare the scale of corruption of the ANC to that took place under apartheid. What are your views on that?
It depends on what you label apartheid. When apartheid in itself was corrupt, it was corruption at a sort of different level. It was
a philosophical corruption, I guess.
Yeah, it's a technical, semantical sort of engagement.
Right.
Because what happened, land was taken on a scale that you could never imagine. And we haven't yet weighed up what happened to us as a people. We haven't weighed up what happened to our land losses, for example. We haven't weighed up how many diamonds went out of the country. We haven't weighed up how much gold went out of the country. Now, what happens is, when we look, again, I'm going to separate this into the elites, and I'm going to talk about the ordinary folk.
Right.
The ordinary folk may not have made money, the ordinary folk. But when you look at the Bernie Bernatos and so on and so forth, and the Oppenheimers and the De Beers, if you start quantifying that, you'll see exactly what we are talking about. Further, I can provide documentation that talks about corruption within the apartheid regime. And it wasn't corruption, it was between the ANC and the apartheid regime, it was the manner in which they were corrupt. That is actually the differentiation, not the quantification, not even whether they were corrupt, because both parties are immoral. Both parties were destroying the country. Both parties were creating animosity. Both parties were feeding an elite and using the poorer people to fight each other and kill each other. And there are so many similarities if you look at it. That's why for me, I see the ANC as a continuation of apartheid, not anything different.
Right.
So if you want to do research, if people come to me after this, I can provide you with documentation that says, even you do, if you logically sort of translate how much went out in diamonds, how much went out in gold, how much went out in other semi-precious stones, if you weigh up the taxation system, for example, if you look at even the Cullinan diamond, which belongs to our people, sitting on the crown of the English Queen, and part of it on a scepter. If you start doing all the numbers, you'll see it's the same thing. It's just that the ANC is blatant in its theft. It's blatant in what it does, and the form of corruption is different. With the other forms of corruption, for example, it's like Jack going up and stealing the goose that lays the golden egg, and the ANC eating the goose that laid the golden egg. That's the difference, but they both Jacks.
Right. But the difference is under apartheid, South Africa blossomed. And let's face it, most people had employment. It was a country that was really just an incredible symbol of success in Africa when you look at the rest of Africa. And then you had the world pushing down on the economy because of the apartheid laws and so on. But if you look at South Africa today, it's a complete and utter mess. So, I take your point that both were corrupt, but the corruption within the National Party run government and their policies and so on did allow South Africa to really blossom. What the ANC have done is they've basically chopped the stem of the flower, and now it's withering and dying. So there's got to be a difference between the two.
Well, methodologically, it's merely a case of methodology. I had actually looked at corruption. We got into a debate with an ANC person, and they said corruption is everywhere. And I had to agree, yes, corruption is everywhere. But it's how you handle corruption. For example, like I'm saying, some people knew how to keep the goose alive and take the egg. It wasn't their goose, it wasn't their egg, but they kept the goose alive. Other people come and they kill the goose and they have no eggs. And that's where the difference is. For example, if you look at Asian corruption, there's lots of Asian corruption as well. But in Asian corruption, what they do, let's say there's 100 million contract. The person will pad it. In business they say padding, nice
Right.
term. You crank up the numbers. You put in your fee, finder's fee, or whatever you choose to call it.
Mm-hmm.
But you deliver what you're supposed to deliver.
Right.
The ANC reversed that. What they did, instead of taking 2 million rands, for example, and delivering the 98 million rands, what they did, they stole 60 million rands and left 40 million rands with the end result. The country began to fail, and it got worse and worse and worse and worse. And that's where we are, because if you look at the trillions that were gone, and you look at the other things that happened, I mean, it's not only corruption, it's maladministration as well, wasteful expenditure. For example, I'm not sure of the number of municipalities, but most of them just haven't performed.
276.
If you look at the roads are getting worse.
Yeah.
If you look at infrastructure, it's failing.
Yeah.
And so what happens is it's not only corruption directly, it's also cadre deployment. It's also the BEE, whereby whoever can vote for me gets a job. It's jobs for pals. It's patronage politics. It's that kind of thing that when you look at it cumulatively, I think that's the word, you'd find that it wasn't only the theft in itself, it was other things that contributed to the failure of the country. And one cannot but lay this at the feet of the ANC and lay it at the feet of people like the EFF as well, because they've all bankrupted this country. And they did it in a frenzy of feeding. There was no one that was saying, I will deliver at least 80% of what I was mandated to do. Instead, they took the 80% and delivered 20% of what they were mandated to do. So if one summarizes, I think we're almost at the verge of a failed state. And when we look at the theft and looting goes higher up. It goes to this elite, and this elite has to be removed and jailed, as far as I'm concerned.
Now I want to take that one stage higher, because you talk about this situation within the old National Party government, politics before that in South Africa, and post 1994. You've got this hidden wealthy group who seem to be pulling all the strings. Now, the only way to actually break this vicious cycle is to get rid of those people and their influence over the politicians. How do we do that?
For us, the anti-treason movement, we don't only look at South African politics. We're saying the entire political system is flawed. It's very, very flawed. And people, whether you're in America or whether you're here in South Africa, you'll find that corporations control the government. It's what they call corporatocracy.
Right.
And we have to begin to start looking at corporations, because if you look at COVID-19, for example, COVID-19 did not happen in a vacuum. COVID-19 was also governed by people who control the WHO. And if you go beyond that, you're going to look at the Rothschild, you're going to look at the bankers, you're going to look at the IMF, you're going to look at the World Bank, for example. And look at, for example, the stringent conditions on the loan that was given to South Africa. There were stringent conditions that there has to be a lockdown. So South Africa is complying to a figure that we have not elected. So if they are obedient to a figure that we haven't elected, then who's the government? Who have we employed? Because we never employed the IMF.
Yeah, they're just a proxy government.
Exactly. And so this is where we have to bring in the laws of treason, because there are two parties in treason. There's the party, let's say, whose interest is being served, and the party that serves that interest. It's like the Zuma-Sheikh relationship. There's a corruptee and a corruptor. In the, let's say, the 500 billion rands, there's a corruptee and a corruptor. The IMF at the highest level should also be held to account. The Rothschilds, even though they work through a number of subsidiary companies, should also be held to account. And we cannot look at the reset, because there's the new keyword that they're using, the reset of society. We cannot look at the reset of society without looking at these figures, these shadowy figures who are above the law. In the national context, the ANC places itself above the law. Sorry. In the international context, there are also players who place themselves above the law. And it's time for us as society to begin to look at these players and say, who are these players? How do they benefit from us? Why is it that we cannot hold them to account? If we have international corruption, we should have international instruments to deal with this corruption. But we have to begin to start thinking around this. We have to think at this level. If we're not thinking at this level, then the game will continue. We'll keep moving the pawns, but the queens and the rooks will still be in place, and the player is still in place. So what do we begin to do? We may have to start at the lower level by dealing with the governments. And we believe that the South African people should begin at this point be leaders, because politically the world looks to us for leadership. And we should lead by changing the nature, fabric, and level of our politics, by ensuring that we get the government dissolved. We can work through, for example, getting a series of referendums. We should work through designing a caretaker government. We should analyze the political system, put in place checks and balances, and ensure that by dealing with this government, the next step is to deal with the people that corrupted them. And so in one fell swoop, we'll be able to put everyone in the net. It won't be an event. It will be a process, because where we are now is part of a process. It's a longer process. And to rid the world of that means it's going to be a long process. I recall, I'm a social activist. We always said another world is possible. It's time to build that world.
Right.
That's my view.
Yeah. Well, you know, it's you've touched on something that I've really looked into in a great detail, and that is the money power, the Rothschilds. You know, the way money is actually distributed, and I think the problem we have when we talk about these hidden figures who actually control countries, like the Rothschilds, they actually have an office in Johannesburg. And the guy who, I think he's the deputy, or he heads up the Rothschild office, is that ex-finance minister in South Africa. I've forgotten his name right now, but he's actually high up in the Rothschild organization. And it's quite clear that when we talk about South Africa, we talk about the banking system, we talk about the Oppenheimers and the Ruperts, who I've heard were largely funded, again, like Cecil Rhodes, by the Rothschilds. So they're beholden to the Rothschilds. It's like, again, a proxy to the Rothschilds. Now, the Oppenheimers have just they've given 500 million rand to the horse racing industry in South Africa. Yeah, that's a huge amount of money, because they want it to survive, because apparently some of the Oppenheimers love horse racing. So they throw 500 million rand at horse racing, and you've got a population that's starving, and, you know, it's like Scrooge. They don't bring out any money or distribute food parcels to the poor who are absolutely starving. They're on their doorstep. They're here in South Africa, and they're doing very little for them, apart from, I believe, some quite large donations to some of the charities who are very well established. But, you know, if you look at 500 million rand being thrown at a horse racing industry, when there are so many people starving in the country, I think that is a complete misallocation of a donation. What are your views on that?
For me, what happened, the ruling class has never cared for the people. The banking industry is a cold, mercenary business.
I agree.
That doesn't care for the people. It's a bloodless business. I mean, for example, if you go back into England, the moneyed class never cared for the poorer commoners. They never cared for them. The commoners could die, for example. They didn't care. The commoners could be in filthy hospitals. They didn't care. We cannot expect, and we should not expect, the moneyed class to care for the commoners. The commoners are just sheep and cattle to be milked or taken to the slaughterhouses. That's all. We're nothing more, we're nothing less. And that is why the entire system, the entire world system, is going to lead to our demise. And if you look at, for example, we all interconnected now to a point where even the ANC becomes irrelevant in the global context.
Right.
Look at climate change, for example. There we have companies like Rio Tinto, for example, that are plundering Peru. We have other companies cutting down the rainforests. Now they're starting to cut down the rainforests in Congo. You know, if we carry on at this rate here, the ruling class, the rich class, is going to ensure that we pay the price. They can run away, they can build their homes, they can do whatever they want to do. But at the end of the day, it's us, the poor people, who will be paying the price in blood, sweat, and tears to save them, so to speak. Therefore, we shouldn't defend them. We shouldn't defend them whether we used a race or class or any such thing. We should hold the ruling class to account, whether that ruling class is black, white, yellow, or green. We must hold them to account because they're destroying the planet. And if they destroy the planet, we go with it.
Right. I totally agree with you. I think you've hit the nail on the head again. I've got to tell you that the side chat these are the comments in the side chat. They're blown away by your comments and statements, and you know, I don't think anyone in there disagrees with what you're saying, and they love your perspective. I have a question here from Vanessa Parry, who says, Rassool, what do you think of direct elections?
It's a double-edged sword. Direct elections means that anyone with money can elect their president. I was just having an argument. I said if Nazis came here, they'd elect a president because they've got the money. If we don't have a framework of principles that govern direct elections, then we're going to have a huge problem. We also have to begin to look at the framework within which a single entity, be it a personality, how do they function? Who do they use? What's the criteria? What's the measure? Again, it comes back to direct democracy. If this person doesn't perform, how do we remove them? How do we remove the parties if they don't perform? Because if we electing a person, that person, if they're not attached to a particular party, will have to deal with other political parties to ensure that administration happens, to be sure that execution happens. Now, how do we hold them all to account? How do we ensure that we still protected? Because even if we change the form, if the essence is still the same and the essence is crooked and it's toxic and it's poisonous, we're still in trouble. You know, it doesn't make sense to change whether you're having your poison in teaspoons or tablespoons. We've got to get rid of the poison in itself, and the only way we can get rid of that is by putting a framework that's in place that says whether you're a single person or a party, if you're involved in corruption, we'll bring back the death penalty for you, and we'll deal with you like China deals with you. So it's the framework. We have to look at the rules of the game. We have to understand why are we playing the game before we just play the game. For me, I like the fact that it allows a person to become president, because I could become president. But what if I've only got the EFF and I've got Malema and the ANC to deal with? What if I've got to use these people? How much power will I have? So we, the people, the power is now in the ball is in our court. We should demand now. We should say, let's have a referendum. And in this referendum, we say, let's look at the political system. And in this political system, we re-engineer it, because we inherited this. We didn't have a negotiation where we sat down and said, let's pull all of civil society together. Let's pull, for example, political scientists. Let's pull economists together. Let's pull social scientists together. And then we develop a political system that puts the people at the center. We never did that. What we inherited was a system of lords that didn't care for us anyway. And no matter what dressing we put on it, whether we put a nice gown on it or put a tattered rag on it, it's still the same monster. And we have to deal with this monster. Right. Now's our time.
Now, what we're really talking about here is the global political scenario, because clearly, whichever country you go to, even here in Australia, you got the same problem with the elite basically running the show. And in the US, you've got the lobbyists who run the show. And right at the top of that tree globally is the banking industry, because they're the ones who fund the elections. I mean, they fund the parties they want to get in, and they basically control the whole financial system in what has become a global economy now around the world. How does a country like South Africa get rid of that cancer? I'm talking about the banking industry, which has that, it's like an iron grip around everybody's throat, saying if you don't do it the way we want, we're going to throw you out. How do we get rid of that cancer?
We are many. We are many. We need to link with other, the oppressed need to meet each other. Over and above the artificial constructs of race and class, over and above that. Let's say, for example, we can network with the other oppressed Africans. We can network with the Irish. We can network with the Roma. We can network with all oppressed people in Europe, Latin America, here and there. We can change how we engage, even self-governance, for example. We can use a canton system. We can restructure taxation, because the IMF, as much as it beats its chest, if we as a people, as a continent, say we don't want to pay you, and every other continent tells them, go to hell, believe me, they can't do anything, because if the workers unite, they don't have a standing army, for example. They don't have enforcers. What they rely on are people like us who buy into the system to make the system work.
Right.
They co-opt us. A soldier is a worker. If he downs tools, what happens? A pilot is a worker. If he downs tools, what happens? If a captain in the Navy downs tools, what happens? We are co-opted into the system, and we make the system work. There was a political thinker called Frantz Fanon, and he raises the aspect of the psychology of the oppressed. And I am asking, how is it that a small minority controls the majority? Let's move race aside.
Right.
So let's talk about America, for example, which is primarily white. America is dominated by corporations. Corporations buy parties. They buy and sell parties. And that's a very small elite, a transnational elite that may not even be American citizens that are controlling American politics. They control American economics. They control industry in America, for example. So if we, as the oppressed here in South Africa, can link up with the oppressed in America, and we can link up with the oppressed in China, we can link up with the oppressed in Japan, we can link up with the oppressed in Europe. What can the banking system do to us? What can it do to us? Because it gets smothered. Let's say, for example, the Rothschilds have money. Where do they keep their money? Isn't there some clerk that writes down where they keep their money? Isn't there some teller that distributes their money? Isn't there some engineer that moves their money? Isn't there someone that's writing their software? If everybody stopped working for them, these people are powerless. We make them powerful.
Right.
In the same way, we make politicians powerful because we're apathetic.
I think it's going to take thousands of years to unravel the influence that the bankers have on society across the world. Now, I've got a couple of questions that have come through. Viking Boer says, please ask Rassool what his name means. I think it's the way it's spelt. And how did it happen that his parents gave him the name and a surname Snyman? Thank you.
My name means messenger.
There you go. Very apt.
And I'm bringing you a message today. I'm saying let's stand up to our governments. When you look at my surname, for example, it's a long, complicated story, which would be interesting one day if we sit and we talk about indigenous identity.
Mm-hmm.
You'll understand and read people like Professor Lysergang, who talks about the origins of South African society. You'll find, for example, my great grandmother was from Batavia. My great grandfather was from Germany. On my mother's side, and my people are Bushmen. So we married in and out of the indigenous people, and then married deeper into the indigenous people. So that's how I have the surname Snyman. Rassool is, of course, the name that I bring my message to you with.
Right. Well, that's fascinating. Now, Dan Berryman has asked, Rassool, I may be wrong, but is the death penalty not still in our constitution for treason?
No. Remember, we adopted the philosophy of humanism. Humanism means life is sacred. Under all circumstances, life is sacred. Even now, if I was charged for treason, what would happen? I would be jailed. That's the most we can do. But it's interesting. It's an interesting question when we talk about the death penalty, because it immediately throws into account the judiciary itself. We are sitting with a judiciary that's non-functional or semi-functional. For example, if I'm going to use this, I hope the ladies don't get offended, but we're going to use rape as an example. If a woman gets raped, she goes to the police station. The first thing that happens, no one knows how to take her statement.
Right.
The second part is they don't know how to deal with her. The third part is they don't know how to handle forensics, and activists will tell you that's where the second rape takes place. The rape of the mind, the rape of the psychology, the rape of the person or the persona. That's after the physical rape. Then you go to the second leg of the journey. The investigating officer is overwhelmed. He's got too many cases. He doesn't have the instruments to work. Then you're getting the case that's going to the courts. You've got a crooked person that's handling all of that, and an incompetent system that's dealing with that caseload. Then it goes to the prosecutor. It goes to the pool at the courts, and more likely than not, it will get lost. If it doesn't get lost, you can bribe someone and get rid of the records. Then it goes to the prosecutor, who's bribable. Then it goes to the magistrate, who in some instances is overwhelmed, and in other instances also succumbs to political pressure. So now we look at the entire system and say, with this system, will we be able to actually do justice with the rape, with the death penalty? Because we can't even investigate. How are we going to reach a conclusion that's just, or will we just be committing murder?
Yeah.
So there are a number of questions. That's why, for me, we've reached a point, all of us, we're standing at a point of reset. Like the global elite are telling us they're going to reset society, we should be saying we want to reset society. We want the money back into the system. We want training. We want to ensure that there's restructuring of the system. We want to ensure that there's justice. Because if we don't have justice, believe me, the problems that we have now will continue. Let's say, for example, if we look at farm murders, how many convictions are there? If we look at murders in the shack settlements, how many convictions are there? If we look at rape, how many convictions are there? Our conviction rate is pathetic. So even though someone may get arrested, we're not going to get a conviction. So we're wasting resources. We should be upskilling the system. We should be cleansing the system. But we cannot cleanse the system unless we remove the government.
Yeah, we got a gangster state.
Nothing less. We've got to remove the government. And not that I've got something against this particular government, because it's just another servant. What I have against this government is it's a crooked servant. It's a servant that's betraying the republic. It's a servant that's betraying the nation, and it's a servant that's bringing about violence that
Right.
should be removed. Finished.
Well, I've got to say, Rassool, if I was in South Africa, I'd be saying Rassool for president, because, you know, you've certainly got some fantastic ideas. And look, I just want to quickly address the side chat. For people watching this video, please remember to subscribe to the Loving Life channel. We have fascinating discussions like we are tonight. And if there are any final questions people would like to put to Rassool, we've been talking for nearly 2 hours, so I don't want to keep Rassool up too late. But I've really enjoyed this discussion. It's been absolutely fascinating. And Rassool, is there something you would like to say to everybody watching this video now, or who might watch it later? We've got about 400 people watching right now.
My message to all people is that be active. Participate in politics. Participate in how your councillor runs your area. If you see something, raise a complaint. If no one deals with it, go higher. Don't let it pass. You are a part of this country. And if you are letting it pass, then you're contributing to no one caring. If you love your country, look after it. We have to build this country. We have to raise this country. We have to make this a magnificent country. And we can do that. It will take time for us to repair it. It will take a lot of deep thought. It would mean we have to meet each other. We have to have people-to-people discussions. We have to talk through our churches. We have to talk through our political gatherings. We have to talk through our youth. We have to talk even through our preschools. Because for me, I'm using a business principle in that I'm saying grow your market. I'm saying let's grow the country. Let's invest in our youth. Let's move our youth away from violence. Let's teach them how to interact with others. Let's break down the racial barriers that we have. Let's break down the class barriers. Let's offer our hands to others. And let's build this nation. And we can do it.
Fantastic. Now, Dr. Zane Hendricks has raised a very interesting point. He says, Rassool is very interesting and knows his stuff indeed. What is your contact email, or how can people contact you after this live stream? Have you got like an email address people can contact you by? Or a website?
I'm not that famous yet. I'm not like you, Scott. At least you famous. I'm not. I'm on Facebook. You can also get me at Rassool, RASSOOL, the digit 1, at M for Mary, J for Jack, V for Vernon, N for Nelly.co.za. Let me repeat that. RASSOOL, the digit 1, at M for Mary, J for Jack, V for Vernon, N for Nelly.co.za. I'm available on Skype and I'm on Facebook, and I've yet to learn about Telegram.
Right.
So
yeah,
I'm learning.
I don't have time for Telegram. I'm flat out with just my emails that I get every day. Okay, so there's the email address for Rassool if you want to contact him after the live stream. Rassool, thank you so much for joining us tonight. It's been an absolute pleasure and been, for me, very, very enlightening. We've had close to 500 people watching most of the time. So we've had a really big audience, a good audience. And for those who are watching right now, thank you so much for joining us. I hope you learned something tonight. I certainly did. I find this absolutely fascinating. Please remember to subscribe to the Loving Life channel. We have interesting live streams every night, or most nights, at 8 p.m. And on Thursday night, of course, we're having a huge bikers event on the Loving Life channel. And we're expecting over 1,000 people to be attending that. Bikers from all over South Africa hopefully will be joining us on Thursday night at 8 p.m. All right, now in closing, I just want to thank the moderators for the fantastic work they do in keeping the side chat clean and friendly. Thanks, guys. Well done once again. And finally, to our guest, once again, Rassool, thank you so much. Would love to have you back on our channel anytime, because there's so much we can talk about. We've only just scratched the surface.
Well, I must say thank you to you, Scott. Thank you to the viewers for taking the time to listen to me. I'm not very smart. I just sound smart. And I hope that one day we'll sit and our children will be in a world that we created, that we helped create, that's a nice place for them, a constructive place for them, and that they live in peace. That's my wish.
Right. Well, I have to say to you, for the first time tonight, I disagree with something you said. And you said, I am not smart. I have to tell you, I agree in part, but I would say what you should be saying is, I am very smart, because what you say with coherence, and it all makes sense. You've obviously studied your subject extremely well, and wow, fantastic interview. Please take care.
Thank you.
Now, everybody watching, I'm going to be wrapping up this live stream now. Please take care, guys, and have a good evening, and I hope to see you tomorrow night at 8 p.m. We'll be having another live stream then.